behold, I send my messenger before your face who will prepare your way before you. And then he says, truly I say to you, among those born of women, there's risen no one greater than John the Baptist. We're going to come back to what that means. But first he says, the world takes the kingdom by violence. The violence take it by force. And what he's saying is God's prophets, God's people have always faced struggle and difficulty. John's wondering, why am I suffering? And here's the thing, Jeremiah was imprisoned. Isaiah was rejected. God's righteous prophets have always suffered. The world takes it by force, and the world is opposed to Jesus' kingdom and is bringing violence against it, and ultimately will bring violence when he suffers on the cross. So don't think that something's failed because the kingdom is meeting with resistance and violence. It is the kingdom that has always seen that violence. And then he returns again to the idea of who John is. John is the messenger who is before his face. No one greater than John. And then there in verse 14, if you're willing to accept it, he's Elijah who is to come. Elijah was understood to be the prophet who would return to announce the coming of the Messiah. And what he's saying is, I'm the Messiah. John's Elijah. John has that role of announcing the coming Messiah. If you have ears to hear, listen to what he's saying. He's saying John is the greatest. Greater than Isaiah is John the Baptist, because John the Baptist looked and said, behold the Lamb of God who's taking away the sin of the world. All the prophets were pointing, and there's John who literally gets to point at the Messiah. John is the greatest of all, greater than Moses, because he baptized the Messiah. John is greater than Ezekiel, greater than all of these, because he looked at Jesus and he pointed to others and said, this is your Messiah, this is your King. And amazingly, Jesus has said he's the greatest because he points to me. Now, can you imagine if, Baker had gotten up and said, I want to introduce our preacher for today, Pastor Scott, and I get up and say, Baker is the greatest of all of you because he introduced me. That's what Jesus is saying. He's saying that the greatness is who you've pointed to, and you've pointed to Jesus. And so he's the greatest. But then catch this. And I hope you've had enough caffeine to be awake at this point with your drowsiness.